Okay, good evening everybody, and I'd like to say thank you to you all for coming on a cold, wet October evening. Very brave of you to venture out. Thanks to Jim for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to address you about my Run with Freedom program, which is based on my 8 keys to fast, effortless, efficient distance running. Okay, so we're looking specifically here at distance running as opposed to track running or sprinting. And my view on this is that we're not really fully evolved to run long distances quickly. So it is a relatively unnatural thing to try to do. So throughout our evolutionary history, we've needed to sprint to get away from predators or to catch predators. Equally, we've gone long distances at a very slow aerobic pace to track animals. Okay, so we're well adapted to both of those methods of running. But to be trying to run marathons in 2 hours or 1:59 even, we have to find a way to do it, I would say. So we have to find a method, perhaps, that is not perhaps entirely natural to us. That would be my kind of take on it. You may disagree. And I do think a lot of the distance running coaching has been maybe more done by track and field coaches over the years, that their focus may be more on kind of building strength and perhaps a little bit less on efficiency of movement. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my own background and how I got to this point. I'm 62 now, and when I was about 25 is when I basically started to think about running. At school I hated running, I hated cross country, nothing I enjoyed about distance running at all. I played ball games, football, cricket, tennis, I liked all that, but I hated running. It just seemed boring and quite pointless. In my mid-20s, I was quite mentally ill. I was extremely depressed. I tried to take my own life twice. And the second time seemed to actually bring me back to life somehow, because I realised I had to do something about it. I was about 40 kilos, so I was just skin and bones, nothing much else. I was an alcoholic, I was a chain smoker. My idea of good nutrition was a 6-pack of Mars bars. That's all I did all day, every day, was drink, smoke, and eat crap, and get very depressed. So I had no kind of youth running background at all. But what I did discover was that getting outside in the fresh air, and first of all walking the dog, and then eventually starting to run, just made me feel better. And I discovered a kind of new freedom, I suppose, of get away from my stress and troubles. And I'm sure that's the reason a lot of people start running, particularly older runners, to deal with the stress of day-to-day life, perhaps. So I very quickly started running more seriously, and I found the more I ran, the better I felt. The faster I went, so the more I enjoyed it. I started doing a few fun runs and stuff. I didn't have park runs in those days. Joined a club eventually, and I found myself sort of at the level of a good club runner, I suppose, by the time I was late 20s. So it happened really, really quickly. And all I ever did then was just put my running shoes and shorts and vest on, because I didn't have all this high-tech kit you've got today. And I just literally went out and ran as fast as I could for as long as I could, pretty much every day. Didn't know anything about nutrition, didn't know anything about training. But I just found, obviously, the more I did, the faster I got. And I was young enough not to get injured. Okay, so my enthusiasm kept me going. I was never really kind of at an elite level, but I had a good club level, club runner standard, I guess. So I did that for a few years, tinkered with triathlon as well. And then my son was born, and I had a second decline where I did nothing, basically, while he was growing up. So stopped running, stopped training, got really obese. So I was now about 85 kilos, and I'd been as low as 40 kilos when I'd first taken up running. So one extreme to the other. In my early 50s, I decided I really wanted to do an Ironman triathlon. So I started training for that, and about 6 years later, I finally completed an Ironman triathlon, or an Ironman distance triathlon. Since then, I've taken up some ultra running. I've done a few 100K races, and I ran the Pembrokeshire Coastal Path a few years ago from start to finish in weather a bit like today, I suppose. Really horrendous. But really enjoyed that. So now these days I really love ultra running. I find it just brings out something in me that nothing else does. It's really therapeutic for me. There's no time pressure. I know I'm not going to run fast anymore. But I just like doing it on my own, getting lost in my own head. I don't listen to music or anything. I just like to listen to the sounds of nature and enjoy the environment, I guess, and just feel part of it. So I've kind of gone from one extreme to the other, trying to run relatively short and relatively fast to relatively long and slow. So there's a place for everybody somewhere along that spectrum, but as you get older, I think you're more inclined to go longer because you get tougher mentally as well. That's the other thing, of course. In the meantime, I had changed jobs lots of times. I've been very distressed in a lot of jobs that I took up, and I didn't really find what I enjoyed doing. I was a social worker for a while. I was a teacher. I had my own businesses. And then at 56, I decided to train as a personal trainer and to try to bring what I like doing, to make a living out of it. And so I started off as a traditional strength and conditioning personal trainer. I now do very little of that at all because it doesn't really work for most people, I don't think. And that's not the kind of fitness that most of us actually need to go into a gym and be pumping iron statically or sitting down. All of us, I think, will be much better off with just good functional movement. So being able to get up and down off the ground, being able to squat and get up, being able to lunge, being able to push and pull and crawl. Because all of those functional movement patterns build a really good base for anything else you want to do, including running. Most people, when they go to the gym, they're thinking it's humiliating and embarrassing to get down on the ground and crawl around. Or even some people are just embarrassed just to squat and stuff like that, or lunge. But they're happy to just plod away on a cardio machine or just sit and lift weights or push weights or whatever. But they may actually be compounding a lot of their movement problems by doing that kind of isolated muscle group training, in my view. So I moved away from that completely. I learnt about, so the last few years I've learnt about fascia, how important fascia is. So talk a little bit about fascia later, but all this long connective tissue that's very much alive, that runs in different patterns throughout our body, and which largely regulates our movement with muscles and tendons kind of working within that construct. I also discovered how important the feet were. So if the feet are not working properly, then you're going to find it very hard to achieve maximal performance. You're going to find it very hard to balance or to engage with the ground properly, to feel the ground. And that sensory experience through the feet is really important in terms of knowing where we are in space, being able to balance, being able to get off the ground quickly, etc. Okay, so feet, really important. So through all of this kind of my own experience working with clients, whether they be runners or as a personal trainer, I came across many weight management clients, people who thought all they had to do was burn more calories and that would solve all their problems. But particularly for older people, of course, that's not really true. So all of that has really led me to where I am today, where I've developed my own 8 keys to fast, efficient, effortless distance running, which is kind of an amalgam of my own experiences, what I've learned from myself, and what I've learned from working with clients, whether they be runners or others, and my own education. So I've done basic professional qualifications, but I've learned a hell of a lot more through just experimenting on myself, trying things with clients. Does it work? Does it not work? Some people will say you shouldn't experiment on clients, but as long as it's safe and they're learning from the experience. And we should be able to perform most movements as human beings. A caveman didn't have to think about engaging the core before he started smashing rocks or whatever. So all of these things should be instinctive and natural, and we only get to that point by having a full range of movement, by doing lots of different activities in a variety of ways. And of course, just running in a straight line is probably, maybe not the best way of developing that wide network of movement possibilities that we need. So that's kind of introduction. Anyone want to ask any questions about it? I've already thrown quite a lot of stuff out there at you. Okay. So what is the Run with Freedom method? So first point to note is it's extremely holistic. Every single thing that we do and think, every movement that we make, everything that's happening in our environment, internal and external, everything affects everything else. So we can't just look at running as running. Running will involve inevitably lifestyle, how well we can move, how well we're balanced, are we symmetrical, can we achieve a full range of movement. It will also involve the brain very much. The only reason we've got a brain is so that we can negotiate our way through our environment, to avoid predators, to find food, whatever. We haven't got a brain primarily so we can write poetry or produce great works of art. That's kind of an add-on, and it may improve our brains, but the main reason we have our brains is, and the main reason we developed our brains is because of the necessity of movement. So it makes sense to improve our brains further by doing lots and lots of different types of movement. And I'm not just talking about cross-training, I'm talking about, although that may be useful, certainly, but actually thinking about moving through all the different ranges that we've got, all the different dimensions, so forwards, backwards, twisting, turning, getting up and down, and just being able to access all of those movements, yeah? So the method, they call it a method, but it's not really a model that we're trying to fit everybody into, like, a square peg has to fit into the round hole. It's not like that at all. It's basically trying to free our bodies up to do what they naturally want to do anyway. So a lot of runners are incredibly tense and try to control everything. They've been heavily coached, perhaps, or they've seen a video on YouTube, or they just think you should run in a certain way. So while some cues may certainly be useful, what we don't want to be doing is trying to consciously control every single movement we make, because you just can't do it. When you're running, or even when you're walking, everything happens too quickly. So we really need to just think about slowing all that down, perhaps. So we need to look at all the pieces in every respect. So yeah, in connection with that, really, we're not, there's very much this idea, I think, in the modern world that we are like machines. That you just, a bit breaks down, you just fix the part, pop it back in, and the machine should run as it did before. I'd say people, you know, they get an injured knee or whatever, they run off, get an MRI, fix the knee, you know, maybe even get a knee replacement, pop it back in, and everything should be fine. But of course, because we haven't addressed the overall structure and the movement patterns, the injury just migrates somewhere else, and we've not really solved anything, and we haven't improved our performance or minimised our injury risk. We're just maybe just compounding things by just looking for a quick fix, whether it be a new part, a stretch, a strengthening exercise, a painkiller, an injection, operation. Yeah, what we really want to be doing is not looking short term, but looking at long-term development. Even if we're 50 or 60 years old, we should still be looking long-term and not this constant short-termism, which is part and parcel of the modern world, I suppose. Everybody wants a quick fix, get out there again, do some more damage, perhaps. So yeah, to me, we're not like machines. We're much more like living organisms like plants and trees and stuff like that, in that we're adapting to our environment all the time. So we need a good supply of oxygen, we need a good supply of light. We need to be exploring our environment, reaching out to things in the environment, sensing our environment, waking up our senses so that we, you know, we're aware of all that. That is developing not only the body but also the brain. And the brain is the root of all good athletic performance, I guess. You know, you look at somebody like Kipchoge and look at the way he talks. He's not only a brilliant runner, he's a very intelligent guy. So has he become intelligent because of his running, or is it the other way around? There's maybe a bit of both there. So yeah, so this constant development and adapting to our environment goes on from the day we're born until the day we die, basically. Every little thought we have, every movement we make, everything we put into our mouths, everything adapts. The organism has to adapt to it in some way. Okay, so we want to make all that environment as good as we possibly can to get the best out of ourselves as runners and as people. But as we get older, of course, it becomes harder and harder to change. And this is reflected not only in our thought patterns, but also in our movement patterns. So people who are very dogmatic and rigid in their thinking and can't think outside the box, who think they've already got all the answers to everything, they tend to be people who don't want to try new movements or try new ways of doing movement. They don't necessarily open to new ideas about running or whatever. That's just an observation that I've made working with people. Some clients will come to me and they're like, well, you can try, but I don't think it's going to work. And other people are like, oh yeah, tell me more, I really want to know. And this, you might call it a placebo effect or something, but that positive mentality is what actually gets you to develop and improve. And the more closed we are to new ideas and new movement, I think the less we develop, the more we stagnate and eventually go backwards or get injured because everything's so rigid. What else? Okay, so I've developed these 8 keys. But each of these 8 keys, whilst they stand in themselves, they're also, nothing is separate. So everything is involved with everything else. One piece of the puzzle moves, the whole piece moves. Whether you're talking about the body, the brain, whatever, your environment, everything changes everything else constantly. Yeah? So the 8 keys basically are going slower to go faster, moving with awareness, balance, elasticity, feet, fascia and free energy, whole body activity, mindset, and lifestyle. So obviously there, you still have to do the running at some point. You can't just focus on those and just not run. But so I haven't mentioned the run training, but that, to me, you kind of need all the other stuff in place before you would think about a training program or anything else. And what I really hate, actually, are all these one-size-fits-all training programs for all the reasons I've just mentioned, because everybody is so different and so unique because of their initial setup, but also because of all the individual unique things that happen to them throughout their lives. So my training program for any client, no matter what they want, is what do you need and in what order. So we want to give a full assessment of where you are today, get you to be able to assess yourself. Have you had past injuries that are affecting your movement today? Are you involved, or have you been involved in occupations that have set particular patterns in your body? Because everything we do is reflected in our body shape. Have you been running for long? What have you tried before? What has succeeded? What hasn't? Do a full self-assessment of your medical history, your occupational history. Do you eat well? Do you sleep well? Because all of those things are part and parcel of you and the person you are today. And also, that will also influence what goals you might have. And we'll come on to mindset later because that's really important, obviously. So that's kind of where I start. I start with the client, not with the program. So although it might be called the Run with Freedom method or program, the method is that we start with the client and work back from there. Nevertheless, there's things that everybody needs, in my opinion, to get the best out of themselves. Okay, so any questions about any of that before I move on to deal with some of the keys?
Can I just check, when you said about sort of it being really rigid, I think, well, I just want to check I'm thinking about it right. So, but presumably you don't mean that like running form itself isn't important, just that or your mindset to being adaptable and changing.
Exactly. Yeah. So what I was trying to say was that your mindset is very much a part of that. So obviously there are some things, and we'll come to it, that are really important in order to be able to run well. But there's also a kind of built-in perfection in the body because of all the years of evolution. It's kind of in our DNA to know how to move well if we allow ourselves to move well. The problem is that people have been controlled and coached and trained, and movement is very much social as well. That's the other point, I think. So people don't like to get barefoot because it's regarded as humiliating, and only poor people go barefoot. People don't like to crawl around on the ground because it's regarded as humiliating. People don't like to swing their arms when they're walking or running because it's like, I don't want to draw attention to myself. People might be watching. It's regarded almost as an arrogant overt way of drawing attention to yourself. But, you know, all of those things we need to be able to do to have a full spectrum of human movement. So it's partly the social control, which kind of makes us want to be like everybody else to fit in, because we have to for survival. But it's also about being able to express yourself within whatever framework you're in, and just freeing up the body so that it can access all the movement it needs. Yeah? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Right, so I'm just going to run through some of these keys. So the first one is going slower to go faster. Why do you think we might want to go slower to go faster?
Stamina.
Stamina. Okay, good point. What do you mean by stamina? No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, stamina, but people have different conceptions of what stamina means. What are the components of stamina? What do we mean by stamina?
Is it to build your aerobic base?
Build an aerobic base. Absolutely right. Bang on. Yeah. So, what would your conception of an aerobic base be, and how would we build it? I'm just trying to find out what you guys know already, and you know what you already believe.
This is just you trying to run at a comfortable pace for as long as you can run at a comfortable pace. That's building an aerobic base.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then so you get stamina as well.
Absolutely. So stamina might also have a mental aspect to it, which we'll kind of park to one side for the moment. But in terms of developing muscle fibres for endurance sport, we want to be developing the type 1 fibres, which are the slow twitch fibres that we need to be able to go long and slow, basically. Okay, so endurance. So that would mean running at a conversational pace. And we know that most recreational runners do most of their long runs probably too fast to get into that zone enough. And therefore, if they're training for a marathon and they're doing a lot of that training at too high a heart rate to be able to get into the aerobic system, because you can't train both the aerobic and the anaerobic systems simultaneously, basically. So you're either building one or the other. And once you try to do one, you inevitably detract slightly from the other. So it would be far better to have a period of aerobic base building, for example, through the winter, where you just really do aerobic training at a low intensity. And then you come into like maybe February, March time, you might start just introducing a little bit more anaerobic training, if that's what suits you. It depends very much on your level. But I've had runners coming to me saying that their triathlon club has told them that the only way they're going to become better runners is to do more interval training. And yet, you know, some of these people are not even able to walk very well. So, you know, it's kind of order of priorities. Trying to do interval training on bad movement patterns, inefficient movement patterns, is really not a good idea. And yet that's what a lot of people are recommending these days. You do high intensity training, whether it be for running or anything else. But there is a place for high intensity work, perhaps, for particular people at particular times. But to put that out there as a blanket solution for everybody, just do high intensity training, whether it be running or something else, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I've seen the damage. I've seen a lot of damage from that, from people who just don't know how to move, and yet they're trying to do things so fast and so heavy, and they getting injured, especially people in their like 40s, 50s, 60s who haven't moved for 20 years. So it's not just about moving more or harder or faster or longer, it's about moving well within your capabilities. So, other benefits from going slower to go faster?
Technique.
Technique, yeah, what do you mean by that, Jim?
So trying to gain a feeling for what you're doing that you can do in slow motion almost, and then
Yeah.
speed it up so that you can achieve better, more efficient run.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this on Wednesday, weren't we, Jim? Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I'm glad that's really stuck, hasn't it? Yeah, it does.
It resonates with me. Yeah.
So yeah, the slower we do things, the more efficient we can become at them. You wouldn't get in your car just try and drive off at 100 miles an hour if you didn't know how to drive, would you? You wouldn't learn a foreign language by trying to read a complex technical journal, would you? You know, you would start with a few phrases. If you're driving, you'd start by knowing how to use the gear stick and the brake, more importantly. Otherwise, it's going to end bad. You're not going to learn anything. You're just going to crash. And the same goes for movement. The brain learns best when we go slow. And when we're confident with a movement, just like when we're confident with a language or driving the car or riding a bike, when we're confident with that, the brain will say, okay, now we can go faster. We don't have to think about that anymore. We've mastered that. Let's move on to the next level. But if we're trying to go fast and we haven't mastered the basics, then that's really not teaching the brain anything new, and it's not really furthering our athletic development. So that may be a foreign idea for quite a few people, but I see it all the time. You see it on YouTube. You go onto YouTube and you'll see hundreds and hundreds of videos of people moving around their movement prompts. They're doing it incredibly quickly, so you can't spot it. You know, they're blagging their way through it. People think that, yeah, oh, that's great, yeah, burning loads of calories, but it's not really about that. So in terms of running specifically, the way we can break this down is we would start by looking at somebody in standing posture. You know, are they balanced? Can they access a full range of movement? Can they get up and down off the ground? Can they squat? Can they lunge? What can't they do and what can they do? What's missing in their movement? Okay, in a static posture, or relatively static, is the skeleton imbalance. Is somebody leaning over to one side? They're going to walk like that, they're going to run like that. Or this is going to get very compressed probably, this is going to get long and also stiff and tight. The result is poor performance, massive injury risk. And I was watching the Oxford Half Marathon yesterday, and there were guys even quite close to the front of the field who really, they just could just be so much better, I think, if they could just let their bodies be free. And so you'll see people like this running along like this, and they find a way around it, you know, and they can still do well in the short term. But how much better could they do if they had more freedom of movement? You know, it's kind of a biomechanical fact that they could do better. But their brain has magically found a way through it for them. That's not to say we all need to be totally symmetrical. We're not designed to be symmetrical because we've got some organs on one side of the body that we haven't got on the other. Some of you probably right dominant or left dominant. All of that is going to influence the way they stand and the way they move. So we don't want to control that too much, but we want to give people as many options as possible. So that if they're all over here, how can they get over there? Well, you know, it's going to be a struggle, isn't it? So everything's going to be going this way. So we've got ways of doing that so that we can balance the skeleton out better, so that all the muscles around the skeleton can actually move freely in all three dimensions. And that's a lot of what I do, as not only a personal trainer and running coach, but also an anatomy and motion practitioner. So starting with standing and then walking. Can we walk efficiently? Okay, so we need to be able to move all the parts of the body walking to be able to get a long stride and that, you know, as you go into jogging and running fast, having that ability to move through all those ranges freely and comfortably can only improve performance, you know, if everything else is right, of course, like the mindset and the lifestyle and everything else. But what else? So I was talking before we started to this lady here, so I've forgotten your name. Liz, about marathon and speed work for marathons. Well, I'm not sure that most of us want to be doing a lot of speed work for marathons, because a marathon is nearly all aerobic energy. There's a tiny, tiny percentage, almost infinitesimal percentage, that's actually down to the anaerobic system. It's mostly from building up type 1 muscle fibers and being able to burn fat for fuel and stuff like that, which also comes from training at a low intensity. And it's only maybe, even the elite runners, we think that they're running super fast, but actually most of them are running aerobically most of the time, and they're not actually doing a lot of high intensity workouts. So it's not, I'm sure you know, it's not like the Rocky movies where you just go and work as hard as you can every day and you get great results. You know, it doesn't work like that. You have to have a kind of aerobic base, and that aerobic base is actually kind of defines your limits in terms of how much you can develop after that. Okay, so for some people, anaerobic work might be, speed training might be appropriate at some point in the training cycle, but I think generally speaking, it tends to get way overdone generally because of our mindset, because we often think that doing things slowly and easily and comfortably is not really achieving anything. No pain, no gain, go hard or go home, all this stuff, you know? You've got to think intelligently about what we're doing. So other benefits of going slower to go faster, we're likely to be using more fat for fuel than sugars, okay? On the whole, everybody's different, but once we get above a certain heart rate, we're dependent on sugar, and obviously you can only access so many carbohydrates before we start hitting a wall of some kind. There's less metabolic stress when we go slower, so we get less carbohydrate cravings, less sweet cravings, better sleep perhaps. So even training, although we love it and we think it releases our stress, and it does to a certain extent, if we overdo the anaerobic side, then we could get burnout, we could get coughs and colds and injuries, and we become a lot more susceptible to all that. It's mentally easier. We can develop patience and a judgment of pace and more awareness of what's going on in our body, so we can become more efficient in our movement. We can get better oxygenation of the blood by focusing more on our breathing as well as we're going slower. Okay. More blood capillaries, more type 1 muscle fibers, or the probably maybe better known things, more alpha brain waves. But alongside that training in the aerobic zone, we also need to recognise there's a lot of lifestyle factors that go with that. So stress, lack of sleep, poor nutrition, all of those will affect our heart rate and therefore our aerobic capacity. So we need to just try and optimise all of those things. And you might say, well, I'm not a professional runner, you know, but you know, why would you train like an amateur if you know what you have to do to go better, to do better? Also, your hormones will be better balanced at a lower heart rate, because we're not going to get all those swings, those ups and downs with adrenaline and cortisol and insulin and all those hormones all over the place, because we don't quite know whether we're coming or going. I'm going to do the second key, and then I'm going to have a little break to give you guys a chance to have a drink and move around a bit. So key number 2 is moving with awareness, as Jim's already mentioned, and we can do this a lot better when we go slower. Basically, we've got no idea, most of us have got no idea what is going on in us most of the time. So if you ask, for example, I had a client in not so long ago, and she was sitting on a row machine, seated row machine, and she was seated like this. And I said, Sue, her name was, I said, Sue, could you just straighten up for me? She said, I am straight. So I said, well, just imagine you're going to fall right over to the right. And she went up to about there. She said, I can't go any further that way, I'm going to fall over there. So that just gives you an idea of how confused we are about where we are in space. It was only taking a picture of her, showing it to her, that persuaded her that she was all the way over there. And if she's sitting like that, she's standing like that, she's walking like that, you wouldn't want to be running like that, you wouldn't want to be running fast like that. So we've got no idea what's going on. We can look in the mirror and everything is just normalised in our heads. So you really need somebody else to look at it and take a picture and show you, for you to realise. And we know it's the same thing with things like food diaries. Only when people start recording what they eat do it actually come home to them that how much they're eating of the wrong sort of stuff. And that alone, that awareness alone, changes their behaviour. And it's the same with movement. So being aware that something's happening, that something's not moving, that we're imbalanced, that awareness of movement is the starting point for improving movement of all kinds, but obviously running is a big one. So this not thinking about stuff, not knowing what's going on, just moving for the sake of moving or because we want to get something done is really useful, actually, because if we had to think about every single step that we take, I'm not going to be able to think about what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do. I need to free the brain to do what we call higher tasks. But we just get locked into all these inefficient movement patterns and thoughts and everything else. So we need to bring awareness to our movement in order to be able to start to improve it. And that's not to say that what we're doing now is bad or wrong. It's just the way it is. So we're not going to judge it. We're not going to consciously try to control everything, but we're just going to become aware of what's going on. Because that awareness in itself often changes things, yeah? And that's really important to note because it's not commonly known, I don't think. It doesn't seem to be. So for instance, if I'm working with somebody who's a runner, perhaps, I might say to them, just focus on what's happening with your right knee as you're running. Just get them to focus on that and think about that. And actually, that thinking about it, they start to fully extend the knee and things like that. But if they don't know, they can't change it. They can't do anything about it. So we have a model of how the body should move, okay? Which might sound contradictory to everything I've said, but we can tell from the shapes of the bones and the direction of the muscle fibers and everything else exactly how the body is designed to move, okay? And we need to try to encourage this model because it's the most efficient way to move. It's how we're designed to move. And you'll find a lot of people missing lots of parts of that model. And as soon as you start to put those missing parts back in, then you can start to get everything in balance again. So it's always if one part of the structure is not working optimally in all planes, then something else has got to do more to compensate. So people who are hypermobile, for example, I had a girl in who was hypermobile the other day, so she claimed, I said, well, are you hypermobile everywhere in your body? Yeah, of course I am. It's been diagnosed since I was a child. But actually, when I looked, her knees were all over the place, but her feet didn't move at all, and her pelvis couldn't move in any plane. So she was using her knees to do the job of those two. So just getting the pelvis and the feet to move through a full range will start to balance everything out so that the knee doesn't have to do so much. So hypermobile might, potentially be just a little bit of a myth. What else? Yeah, so just one final point on this, really. So if we're moving really efficiently, whether it be walking or running, it should seem really quite effortless and not effortful in terms of using muscles. So what we want to be using is the structure of our body falling, resisting gravity, loading up and releasing energy. And we'll talk a bit about how we do that later, but if you're having to use enormous effort to get your leg through every time you strike the ground because you've got such a slow cadence and you're landing out in front like this, you're going to have to use a lot of muscle to get the leg through, yeah? Legs are incredibly heavy. So the less muscular effort there is, the more efficient loading and unloading of energy from the ground, the more muscular effort we've got in reserve, if you like, for when all of that efficiency runs out. We want to go super fast, perhaps. Then we can bring more muscle into play when everything else has been exhausted, when the elasticity of the tissues has got to its end range, yeah? Any questions about that? Talked an awful lot. I feel like you're just like sitting there staring at me. I'm not sure whether it's going in or whether it's... Any comments or thoughts on any of that?
Can you talk us through the cycle that you expect in terms of awareness? So you're from the big toe to the midfoot, to the ankle, to the knee, to the hip.
We're going to come to that after the break, Jim, because that's quite a big topic in itself.
Yeah.
Is how we actually manage that movement. But I just kind of wanted to give a bit of background on the theoretical side of that. We'll go into the moving model, as it were, and the details of it after the break, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have a break for, say, 10 minutes, if you like, guys. If anybody wants to talk to me, I'm quite happy to.
Feel free to help yourself to the food at the back. I think the bar's going to be open, so top up as you need.
So I'm just going to speak for about another half an hour, you'll be relieved today, no more than that, and then have some questions if you've got any questions, and I'll just wrap it up with some links and reading and stuff if you want to know more. I thought I'd jump ahead now actually to key 5, which is feet, fascia and free energy, because Jim was asking about that. And
Sorry.
No, that's fine, because it's kind of pretty important actually. Not that they're all important, but for runners particularly. So feet, fascia and free energy. Well, we know what feet are, and feet obviously quite important if you're a runner. And yet, how many people actually ever feel their feet or look at their feet or know what their feet can and cannot do? Most of the time we wear big bricks on our feet, which prevent us from feeling the ground. So we need to be able to feel the ground, that's the first thing. I'm not saying everybody should immediately go out and run barefoot or go to a minimalist shoe, but particularly, especially if you've been running for a long time and your tissues are tight and stiff and maybe you're getting on a bit in years, it might be quite hard to go from a big built-up shoe right down to the ground. But it might be a good idea to try to get as close to the ground as we can over time as the tissues adapt, so we can get a better feel for the ground. Because if your feet are just locked in as rigid bricks that can't interact with the ground, you can't feel the ground, you won't know where you are in space, you won't be able to load up your ground reaction forces efficiently and quickly enough to be able to balance, to be able to be stable, to be able to propel yourself forward. So feet important. Fascia, just touched on fascia before. It's quite a, don't want to go into too much technical detail about it, but fascia is long lines of tissue that run up the front of your body, up the back of your body, in spirals around your body, up the sides of your body. It runs in different layers. So you've got superficial layers on the outside of your skin. You've got deeper fascia around your internal organs. But all of that tissue is kind of really important. It's alive. It's very sensory. And it responds to things like skin stretch. And the patterns and shapes that we have in our body very much depend on fascia. So fascia is what keeps us upright and stops us from just tipping forwards, for example, with gravity, because we're not just muscles and bones and tendons balanced on top of each other, but all of that is connected through fascia. So the fascial lines are really important. These long lines running up the front, up the back, they all need to be in balance in order for us to manage the skeleton in movement. So when we're lying on a couch or when we're static in a gym, it might not be as important to us to know about fascia. But once we start moving forward, something has got to put the brake on to stop us from falling to the ground, for example. And if you think of walking and running as a series of controlled falls, that's basically what it is. So every time you put one foot forward, it's a kind of leap of faith. Something has to happen. We don't quite know what's going to happen, but because the fascia can react to the ground, especially if we can feel our feet, then we can actually balance ourselves efficiently, load up energy from the ground, and use that energy to propel ourselves forward with the other leg. Yeah. So, in connection with that, we need to be able to get a full range of movement through the feet to load and unload that energy. So as the foot hits the ground, slightly different walking to running in terms of walking will always be heel to toe. Running, some people will heel strike, some people will land more forefoot or midfoot. But the same process happens pretty much whether you're walking or running. It's the same cycle that we go through. So as we put one foot forward in walking, I'll just take walking as an example, it's easier to demonstrate and slow down. So as we put one foot forward, what we want is for the knee to bend, for us to be able to load up energy through pronating the foot. So as the heel hits the ground, everything in the lower body rotates inward to be able to load energy, which can then be released as the other leg comes through. Yeah? So slowing it down hopefully gives you some appreciation of what's involved in that. Obviously it happens super fast, even when you're walking. When you're running, it's happening even faster than that. But there needs to be a phase of pronation, which is essentially lower body coming forwards and inwards to load up to get the opposite effect. And that loading takes place through the long lines of fascia. Okay? So your body is being decelerated from its fall by these muscles contracting and loading up, and then as the other leg comes through, you use that energy that you've picked up from the ground to propel yourself forward. So the pronation that we've just spoken about is actually where your foot lengthens and spreads and becomes a mobile adapter to the ground. It needs to become a mobile adapter for you to balance and get stable, but also for you to load up the energy from the ground. Okay? So that's the first thing that needs to happen. We need to be able to pronate the foot. There's a whole body pattern that goes all the way up the skeleton that follows from being able to pronate the foot. So there's a rotation of the hip. There's an extension of the spine. All of that needs to happen. And of course, we've got the arms moving with that as well. So there's a model there of the whole body in motion that follows from decelerating that fall to the ground. Okay? So pronation needs to happen. The opposite of that is supination. So as the other leg comes through, this leg should straighten, the knee should lock out, and everything rotates back the other way. Yeah? So that's called supination. And at that point, the foot actually narrows and shortens to become a rigid lever. And that rigid lever is essential for you to be able to push off and propel yourself forward effectively. Yeah? And I do a lot of work with people where we actually go through those pronation and supination patterns and make sure that everything's working in sync. Because if you're unable to pronate for whatever reason, maybe you've got injuries, blockages, you've been told to engage the core, which may prevent the pelvis from moving. You've been told that you can't pronate the foot, you've got shoes on that are blocking that. You need to be able to load up, because if you don't, you're going to end up like this, and then this is going to have to get you forward. There's a lot of muscular effort in that, which there isn't if you can pronate and supinate effectively and efficiently all the way up the chain. And that is the key to being able to get a good stride length, to be able to get rotation through the whole body. Yeah? So there's a lot of that in the legs. Don't forget the arms are also doing that same movement. Okay, so when one arm's coming back, we're getting rotation through the lower leg, we're getting a rotation through the torso, rib cage, pelvis. All of that needs to be rotating to get you the maximum stride length and everything else. So it's a whole body pattern that needs to be established. And if we're not pronating and supinating, and if you don't use your arms, for example, when you walk, how many people do you see shuffling along like this? You know, if you don't use your arms, how long can your stride length be? And then people start turning their feet out to get extra range. Okay? So you see all those kind of things. You see people running, not using their arms. And I know people, one time I was told, don't use your arms, just let your arms hang loosely at your side when running. If you don't use your arms, you can't get any stride length. So what is the difference between walking along like this and using your arms? It's a no-brainer. You've got to use your arms. The arms drive the rotation through the body. But they also, they create stability and balance as well, because if you can't rotate through your structure, you know, you're going to have to take a wider gait probably to stay balanced. So there's lots of compensations that go on for people not using their arms. So I don't want to tell people, oh, drive with your arms, because then it becomes really self-conscious. They start going like this. But what they need to do is be able to get back behind and forwards through a full range, so that this all rotates. Yeah? And because people are locked like this most of the time in their daily lives, move your arms, you know, it becomes really awkward and inefficient. So we need to get a full range through the arms. So the arm, not only the legs need to rotate or pronate and supinate, but the arms need to do the same. So we need to be able to get that whole arm line to internally rotate and externally rotate. And it's that range that starts to get rotation here. Runners are told not to rotate through the upper body. The reason for that is because once they start driving the arms come across because the hips aren't working and because the arms can't attain a full range of movement. Okay? So we need rotation. What we don't want to see is one piece not rotating at all, because then somebody else has to rotate more. Okay? So if the pelvis can't move, we can't move our hips, we've got to get through somehow, you know? So every bit needs to rotate and do what it's supposed to do to get length of stride and efficient movement, everything in balance.
You just run over, if we're saying that we should rotate, that you want arms going backwards and forwards, how is that going to be maintained if your shoulders are twisting?
What should be happening is that as you move your arms, your rib cage is rotating in opposition to your pelvis, to your hips.
Can't say I've ever seen a runner run like that.
No, I'm exaggerating. I'm enormously exaggerating.
Well, yeah.
Because all of these movements,
But
they don't have...
people here may not be feeling
Yeah,
that.
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Fair point. Yeah. So, what we do with the method that I use is that we exaggerate the movements of walking gait, basically. Okay, because most people don't have access to any movement in lots of places. So they're stiff-hipped, they don't pronate or supinate the feet, they don't move the arms. So we exaggerate all the pieces that should be in there so that they can access just the right of movement through each of those structures that they need. The brain kind of knows how to do it, but we try to control it and block it all. And what I try to do is just free up all those areas by exaggerating the motions of gait, working on the individual pieces and joining them back together again, so that people can access just enough rotation of all the pieces to get them forward efficiently. Yeah? Does that make sense?
We'll see.
Yeah.
It's just we're actively told, you know, you buy anti-pronation shoes, you buy
That's right,
anti-supination
that's right.
shoes,
You are,
and then
yeah.
you'll turn us to do it. And you'll turn us to...
Well,
if you saw a guy
pronation-
doing the 159, he ran as straight as a die, and there was no rotating or anything.
Well, I think if you'd seen him from behind, you would have seen the slight rotation. Because we don't move like robots. That's the point. We move in 3 dimensions. So we don't, because you can't, if you're walking like this is not going to help you, is it? But you get a much longer stride length. So it's, when we talk about rotation, we're talking about tiny little degrees of rotation. But we're exaggerating it here because slowing it down and magnifying it is what actually gets us to learn that better. You see what I mean? And I know you're told not to pronate the feet. Well, you know, the problem is that not pronating the feet just keeps the knee locked over the second toe, basically. Okay? Which might be okay if you're standing still in the gym, but when you start to move, or if you want to play football, or you're doing a sport, you're moving from side to side, playing tennis, the knee needs to have access to all those different ranges. It can't just stay over second toe, because as soon as you twist or turn, your knee ligaments are put under enormous strain and pressure, yeah? And that's why we get a lot of injuries, because we're trying to lock knee over second toe to stop people pronating. So, what we want though is we just want enough pronation and enough supination to get us through. Obviously, when we're walking or running, we don't want to be doing that, because that's excessive. But sometimes we have to, because most people are locked in this kind of half pronated position, because the shoes are locking them in one place, they can't access more pronation because they're already there, and they can't access any of the opposite movement. So they're just coming through with a foot completely immobile, like a brick. And it's not really loading up the energy from the ground, and so it's got nothing to release. Yeah? And it's also putting all these joints further up at more risk. Yeah.
What do you think about the Vaporfly shoes? I don't have any yet, but they're sort of quite heavy, they're quite thick at the back, aren't they?
Yeah.
And then they sort of claim to do some of the things you're saying here, that
Yeah,
you can't
maybe.
play, like pushing it forward. So do you think they're sort of always trying to compensate things that we should be doing?
This is it, yeah. I mean, I, to be honest with you, I don't know the details of the construction of that and how it's really works, because it's not something I'm interested in really, because I just believe that the feet are miraculous pieces of engineering that need to be allowed to do what's supposed to do. But I think if you've got a shoe that can enhance the built-in technology and the natural technology of the feet, then that might be okay for performance in the short term. But I still think if you've got all that cushioning between you and the ground, that there will be compensations up the chain over time. You need to be aware of where you are in space, and that comes from being able to feel the ground, basically. So the more you've got between your feet and the ground, the slower you're going to be to react to ground reaction forces, the poorer you're going to be at dissipating them. So you might be able to run faster tomorrow with them on, but what are you going to be like in 10 years' time? Yeah? Again, it's kind of, we can have a short-term performance, and long-term maybe not as good. It's a choice. Yeah.
Are you sort of saying like maybe like wearing like racing flats more than the built-up sort of, you know, training shoes is possibly better, or getting a balance of using more?
I'm not recommending anything in particular for obvious reasons, because we're all different ages, we're all different, all got more or less stiff tissues. And I know when I went to a more minimalist shoe, I had sort of quite a lot of Achilles and calf tightness and stuff, because there's more demand on the tissues through there, because you try to you've got further to get to the ground to load up, basically. So it's better once you've got used to it, but in the short term there's a bigger injury risk, and it needs adapting to very, very carefully. Because we all know, we've probably all experienced where we've had a slight change of footwear and suddenly we've got an injury. You know, it doesn't take long because the feet are so sensitive and so everything has to be just right. And then we put a new pair of shoes on and suddenly, oh, that's all gone away. So shoes do make a difference, a massive difference. And I'm not recommending anybody does X or anybody does Y or Z, but just being aware of what the feet can do, and we want to improve our feet function as much as we can within the limits of our lifestyle and shoes and sitting down and everything else.
So would you spend, obviously there's the gentleman just said that obviously he's been advised to wear quite probably a strong fixed shoe. Obviously that progression would have to be very slow over a long period of time.
Absolutely.
And get to somewhere
Absolutely.
maybe not as minimalist, but somewhere between the two. And there's a lot more trainers available today that is in between now.
That's right.
They are understanding that maybe those heavily anti-pronation shoes weren't actually helping people realise this.
But there's been a lot of study in barefoot science over the last 20, 30 years, I guess, which has kind of enhanced our understanding of that. Because at one time, you know, I mean, people didn't used to wear these shoes like 40, 50 years ago. It was only when Nike started bringing out shoes to protect your feet. And now it's kind of become a marketing circus, if I'm honest with you. But I do feel that the inability to pronate the feet is actually causing a lot of injury, because it's giving us a false impression of our security when we hit the ground. So delayed reactions and feeding up the chain, knee injuries, back injuries, hip injuries. See it all the time, day in, day out. And as soon as I get people to start loading properly and pronate the feet, a lot of these things, you know, start to go away. One of the other things that goes with that loading is actually having a high cadence when we're running. Okay, so this is where I tend to start with people. Rather than building the little pieces up, I will tend to start by just trying to get people to keep up a higher cadence, a higher turnover of the feet. Because that, as Jim discovered on Wednesday, probably knew already, but that higher cadence, just you've got no choice. You can't land on your heels with a high cadence. It's just not going to work. It forces you to land more underneath the body and to load better. Because with a slow cadence, you're going to be landing out there with an extended knee and not really loading very well. But with a higher cadence, you're going to be landing underneath the body with a flexed knee and a flexed hip. Those folds through the lower body are what actually absorb and dissipate the shock from the ground. If you're like that, you get very poor shock absorption. But if you're like that and moving into it, then you're loading, you're absorbing that shock better, and you've got more energy to release as you pull through. Does that make sense? So lots of things go with cadence. I'm not going to get you up to do it because that'll be a bit too messy at this point. But you'll find that, yeah, go on.
So on the cadence part, have you found then if someone is in quite a high-heeled shoe, relative 15 mil, whatever, that affects the way their cadence
Absolutely.
be. So to teach cadence in their current trainer could actually be quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean it's still doable, I find, in most cases. It's not so much about the trainer, actually. It's more about their habitual ways of moving. So you are somebody who's running with a cadence of like 150 or something like that, which is pretty slow. And you ask them to suddenly go faster, it's like, I don't know, I just can't understand, it's too hard. But somebody who's already used to a higher cadence, they're able to just pick it up a little bit more. Tall guys with long legs, or tall women with long legs, they tend to often have a slower cadence, whereas shorter people tend to be able to find that cadence a bit more easily, perhaps. That's just my observation, I've got no evidence of that. But a lot of big people I've worked with long legs, big heavy people, they find it very hard to keep a cadence anywhere near 180, which is kind of reckoned to be in the optimal sort of range.
So if you put someone on the grass in bare feet, would their cadence be more instantly?
Absolutely, yeah. And this is often what I do with people, is I get them out on the grass, and because you instinctively pick your feet up quicker. It's like being on hot coals. You want to get off the ground quicker. Yeah. It's instinctive, and it's natural, because that's the kind of way we're built to run. But like I said before, we're not actually perhaps designed or evolved to have run long distances fast. So there's kind of maybe a gap there between what we're trying to do and what we've evolved to do, and maybe for that reason we might need a different type of shoe, potentially, just a guess.
This may be a rookie question, but if you want a faster cadence, does that mean you have a shorter stride length?
You will have a shorter stride length to start with, yeah. So you can approach it from two ways. You can try and get the longer stride length first, but you're much better off trying to get the cadence, and then you can add in the stride length. So stride length will depend on lots of things, especially your hip extension. And your hip extension will come from being able to pronate the foot, because that's where it begins with the loading, and also being able to externally rotate the leg, so all of this can come back straight, rather than a lot of people just coming through like this all the time. They're never fully straightening the leg, so they can't get the length. The other thing that goes with faster cadence is you will inevitably have to drive the arms more. So we come back to arms again. Arms very much driving the running motion, as they do the walking motion. So actually, when we put one foot forward, as soon as the big toe hits the ground, the arms start to come back the other way. Yeah? So that the arms have reached their end range and started coming back, but the foot hasn't reached its end range. So there's a catch up there because the knees don't come forward. So it's like you see these fast cats and things where they're always catching up. You know, the hind legs are always kind of overtaking. So we're the same, we're animals, so that's the way we kind of function. And that's what gets that momentum, that slight delay is what gets you that extra rotation and forward propulsion. So you can't ignore rotation, and driving the arms is rotation, and it also is higher cadence. So if there's one sort of take-home message for me, it would be try and get your feet to do what they're supposed to do, and try to keep a high cadence and use your arms. Using your arms will also inevitably drive your knee a little bit higher. Okay? It will shorten your stride length. You need to shorten your stride length to learn higher cadence. You can't get both straight away at the same time, usually. And the elements of longer stride, apart from hip extension, will also depend upon maybe things like elasticity of the tissues. Are you elastic enough to be able to cope with all that loading and unloading? You might not be. You might be limited by a lack of elasticity, which is another of the keys that we haven't touched on. Elasticity, so that comes from not only practicing the movements and gaining more range of movement through those joints, but also through things like nutrition. So a diet that's high in sugars will tend to cause more stiffness and tightness and inflammation in tissues. Dehydrated tissues tend to be stiffer. Okay, so that's again why all these things are interrelated. You can't just say we're just going to work on a hip extension without thinking about, are we hydrated? you know, are all the movement patterns in place? So just kind of doing some kind of, I don't know, some kind of kettlebell swing or Superman exercise in isolation is not really solving the problem, yeah, to get hip extension. Any questions about any of that? It's a lot. It's kind of quite critical to the running action.
And more an observation really about feet and the idea that actually we kind of put our feet in boxes right at an early stage, so even my 3-year-old son's got shoes, and that really must inhibit the way that we develop our gait across years.
Absolutely.
And then of course when we then start running and loading the foot, we're going to need some help and support. I mean, imagine giving a 3-year-old a sort of brace or something to wear on his back to hold him up. You know, you take that brace off and then ask him to pick up a, it's going to be very difficult. And I can imagine it's similar with running. We don't really give ourselves enough time and strength, you know, time to kind of adapt to things like that running in an extreme sense. Compared, you know, it's single-footed, isn't it? Running is, you're only ever on one foot compared to
compared to walking when you've got both feet on the ground at some point. Yeah, no, absolutely right, Jim. And yeah, everything that happens to us from the moment we're born, maybe even in the womb, has an effect on the way we move. And movement is largely social, like we said. So once kids get to school, start sitting down, you start putting shoes on their feet, all of that is starting to control and restrict their movement. Yeah. And then we tell them that all they need to do is just walk 10,000 steps a day and don't snack on the school bus. You know, it's a bit more complicated than that, and we kind of need to get kids moving more freely within the framework of our society, which demands a lot of this control. You know, we can't get away from it. We can't all go, well, we could go and live in the jungle and just be barefoot and naked and climb trees. But, you know, if you want to live in this society, you kind of have to adapt to some extent. And how much can we modulate the problems involved in that is quite key, really. And it can be done, but you need to make special effort to do it, because it's not going to happen automatically. In fact, the opposite is going to happen. We're going to become more and more rigid, more and more fixed in our movements, more and more fixed in our thoughts, more and more controlled and conformist. And, you know, that's why it's a choice. It's a choice. We either choose that, or we can do lots of things, like I've been saying, to gain more freedom of movement, more freedom of mind, and everything else. So,
the other thing I was going to mention was about thoracic rotation, and thinking about, say, sprinters and the amount of rotation they get when they're off the blocks, and how important that is in driving forward. And then also think about Kipchoge and his stride length. So if you didn't have any rotation, it would be incredibly obvious, because it would be like zero rotating all the time. So the fact that he stays still in a gazelle-like manner,
it shows that everything's rotating just enough.
And also how far he's actually having to rotate. Counterbalance the fact that he's got a stride length of, well, it must be huge, I don't know what it is, but it must be, it must be something
But it kind of looks like he's just running a straight line, because everything is so much in sync, and he's got just the right amount through the whole structure that you don't notice the rotation. You'll only notice the rotation if one bit's locked down and somebody else has to do more. You see people running like this, you know, because maybe the spine can't rotate, so they're getting it through there. Or maybe the feet can't pronate and supinate, so they're getting it through there. People find it somehow in the structure, but it's not optimal. It's just a compensation. So I'm just going to bring this to a close fairly soon, because I've got an awful lot to get through, and it's just too much for one session. There's a lot of information. But just to touch very briefly on the other keys that I haven't mentioned, we've spoken a little bit about the whole body. Running must be a whole body activity. So using the whole body engages those fascial lines that I've been telling you about to the maximum. Okay? Having a balanced skeleton, so balance really important. So balance in standing structure will carry over into balance in walk, into balance in running. And if you're slightly imbalanced, every time you hit the ground, you're biased towards one side or the other. You imagine that happening tens of thousands of times when you're running a marathon. That's a lot of inefficiency and a lot of loading of tissues, shortening tissues on one side perhaps and lengthening on the other, with impact, with shoes that don't absorb the shock because you can't feel the ground. All of those things will limit performance, obviously, massively. So all those little bits and lots of marginal gains, and I've seen it with the people I work with, that just getting little bits of all of those, you know, people can run 5Ks much, much quicker with less effort, just by addressing all those little pieces, rather than just thinking, I've got to do more interval training, I've got to strengthen this or lengthen this in isolation. It really does all need to be joined together into a whole body and whole lifestyle to get the best out of you as a person and you as a runner. It's the same thing, you know. You can't have one without the other. And the more muscular effort we're having to use to move parts, that really signifies to me that we're not using the whole structure as it can be used, potentially. So we mentioned elasticity. There's a lot more there, but I'm not going to go into that today. One thing we haven't mentioned is a mindset. So mindset is probably just about the most important thing of all, because just to go out there and run every day or nearly every day, you need a certain mindset. And what I've found, I said to Jim there, that you know, people who come in and thinking they can't, that's just the way I move. You know, you can't change that. We know we could change it, but if they come in with that attitude, then guess what? It can't be changed because that's what they believe. Whereas other people come in like, oh yeah, I've heard about this, this is really interesting. So-and-so did it, yeah, they're going a lot quicker. They say it's much easier now. And those people, you know that they will succeed because they already believe they're going to succeed. So it's so much deep-rooted beliefs involved in all this. And we've got deep-rooted beliefs about the way we move, what we need to do, what we should eat. We've got deep-rooted beliefs about how we address injuries. We've got deep-rooted beliefs about medications and surgeries, whatever. And all of those will massively affect how we run. They must do. So self-limiting beliefs. A lot of people, you know, they will set themselves up at a certain part of the starting field for a 5K. And guess what? They end up in that position. Other people will start ambitiously forward of where they normally are, and they tend to end up in that position. You know? So I'm not saying you can sort of start at the back and the next day you start at the front and you'll win, but there's a kind of continuum there from not believing you could do anything to believing that you can make progress. And what we're looking for actually is not an overnight success. What we're looking for, again, is a long-term development approach and not a quick PB tomorrow. Because something's going to go wrong probably if you do that. You know, you're not going to maintain that. So long, slow, persistent, continuous progress over time is, a distance runner is not made overnight. It takes, you have to get experience, you have to build up the muscle strength, you have to build up your endurance, you have to build up your mental capacity, your ability to endure and everything else. And we should develop those things kind of sequentially in the right order, but also it's not going to happen. We don't want it to happen overnight. Slow and steady wins the race, yeah? Unless you're a sprinter. So it's a choice, really. So I think that's just about it from me. Any questions? Yes, Lee?
In a coach's environment, so obviously you've got lots of mixed abilities come along to a training session, for example, tonight, and obviously you've got people wanting to go out in an environment. Obviously, how would you give that information across to a range of people? So obviously, it's nice to have one person to coach, but often you might have 40 people to coach over every single different scenario. And obviously, they're all coming to look at you for advice, and they're coming with their injuries and their ambitions. And so how would you implement
I think it's very difficult in a group situation, definitely, because you've got lots and lots of individuals, all with their own issues, all with their own things that need to be addressed, perhaps. But I would, if you have to work in a group situation, you can't work one-to-one with people, then I think we're just looking for the big picture, the obvious red flags. So if somebody comes into you and they're walking like this, then you're probably going to want to try and address that first.
I mean, for example, this last summer season, I've actually added in more of this functional movement. So
Good, yeah.
squats, get off the ground, don't
Yeah,
touch the floor,
Yeah.
and you know, various other exercises. And it is surprising how
Yeah.
little people can do.
Absolutely.
It's simple, basic, getting off the floor
Yeah.
without touching the floor.
But it's also surprising how quickly they can learn to do it once they start doing it. So the first time they do it, it's like, oh, this is so uncomfortable, I'm not used to being down here. But once they've done it 4 or 5 times, it's just like, well, why was I ever worried about that? Yeah, I can do that
Well,
easily.
I'm trying to give it to people to do when they go home. So
Yeah.
while you're watching the television, you can do
Yeah.
certain exercises
Yeah.
3 times, it's called.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
I've introduced it into a group environment, because
Good
obviously
idea.
everyone's got different skills. Some can't do it at all, some can do it easily.
Yeah.
Um,
I've got like a 3-minute mobility drill that mobilises all the major joints of the body, which I put on YouTube, and I just direct people there. And it basically goes down the body and just mobilises everything through a series of different movements, squats and chest opening, getting overhead, lunges, rotations, all of those things. And it's like 10 repetitions of each, just done once or twice a day. It takes 3 minutes. And that's where I would start. Keep it really simple and short.
Simple things, yeah.
You have to keep it really simple and short and focus on the big picture. So the whole body movements, like you were saying, and try and get the most out of each movement you do. So don't just do a lunge with a rotation or an overhead or something else. You know, don't just do a squat. Do squats in 10 different planes of motion. Do squats feet apart, do squats overhead. So you're affecting all the tissues and not just moving everything in one plane.
You'll get people that will be more receptive to what you're giving them. So some will come to you and ask for more, others will just walk away and no, do it till the next week.
It's hard to persuade runners that they need anything other than running, basically, in my experience, apart from an enlightened minority.
Or the injured runner.
Or the injured runner. So very often I only get people when they've been to every other therapist or doctor or surgery. And then we just try and put the missing movements back into the structure. Just a few books here that might help you and anybody else who's interested in kind of where a lot of my ideas come from. And I'm not kind of totally pushing any of these, but I've just said that all of these have helped me in my overall understanding of running and movement in general. So, What the Foot by Gary Ward. I don't know if anybody's heard of Gary Ward, but he actually he worked with Dr. Chatterjee on the Doctor in the House series on TV. Some of you may have seen it. He basically goes in and cures people, gets them off their medications and painkillers just by getting the structure moving, basically. So that's What the Foot by Gary Ward. And his take on it is that we are just a skeleton in space and the muscles are reacting to where we are in space rather than everything being pulled around by muscular activity. So it touches on fascia and stuff like that as well. But for a good understanding, that's totally transformed my way of thinking about movement and running. And it works once you get the structure balanced. Statically and in walking gait, everything improves.
Do you have to adapt anything for those of us who are advancing in years and maybe getting a bit of arthritis in some of these joints?
Every movement has got a progression or a regression. You know, so that's why I say we start from the client. If you can't lunge and keep your foot flat on the ground, if the heel comes up and you're all over the place, we're just going to take it back a step. You know, why can't you do that? So we would try to get you to lunge and raise your arms overhead or rotate or something like that if you're not able to keep the foot flat on the ground and, you know, lower your body down. So just take it back a level. Can you just get your foot flat on the ground? Can you pronate the foot? Can you keep the heel on the ground when you do that? A lot of people won't. They'll be all over the place. There's no movement through the foot. And that affects the whole structure. And that's basically what Gary does. And I've been on a 6-day course with him in London, learning all about his model of how the body moves, how the skeleton moves in walking. Which can transfer over to running. Running with the whole body, Jack Heggie. This is quite an old book. It's in the 1990s, I think. But a lot of it is about joining all the pieces of the body together to make everything work better. So there's lots of exercises in there. Pretty simple exercise, but again, it's this idea of moving with awareness, so that you've got a better idea of how you're actually managing your skeleton in space. This goes back to, Feldenkrais was around in the 50s, 60s. Awareness through movement, how much of movement is social, how much of it is controlled through education, how, again, we can improve our movement through being aware of how we move without trying to control things. So all of these three are kind of based on very similar ideas, that you have to move slowly with awareness and then you can go quicker, efficiently, with a better range. Anatomy Trains, this is kind of the Bible for anybody working with the body and wants to know more about fascia. So it's quite technical, it's probably not for the lay reader, but for anybody who's a health and fitness professional who wants to know all about these long lines of fascia and how important they are and how you can change them and improve them. That secures us. Anatomy Trains by Thomas Myers. And also a bit of a god to me, probably, Maffetone. That's a big book of endurance training and racing. Probably a lot of you have heard of Maffetone and the Maffetone method. And he had some great results with athletes, particularly triathletes, by getting them to run slowly, basically, and developing their aerobic base, which we were talking about before. And all the pieces that go with that, with the lifestyle, the nutrition, the stress, you know, the feet, how the feet need to work properly. Great book, and so much information that's useful in there, particularly about that particular way of doing things. So if you want to have a look at any of these books, when we finish, then you're welcome to just come up and take pictures of them or whatever you want to do, have a flick through them. Just finally coming back to your question about what would you do with people, well, I've kind of got an 8-step process that I use on my programs. So we've got 8 keys and we've kind of got 8 steps. So it starts from complete self-assessment, physical and all the lifestyle pieces. We look at their foot pressures, where they're holding the pressure in their feet and how is that reflected in the skeleton above. What is their range of movement like? What's their functional movement like? Can they squat and lunge and touch their toes, get overhead efficiently? Without that, you're going to struggle to move efficiently. Running form, cadence, which we talked about. Cadence is big for me, although I don't try to impose a particular cadence. We want to get those feet turning over quickly to be efficient. The biomechanical aspects, the whole body moving together. Are there pieces missing? Are there pieces that we need to liberate so they can do their job? Elasticity. How can we get better elasticity, apart from static stretching, which is not really solving the problem. Balance and symmetry. We look at people's balance. Are they able to move? Are they equal both sides? Can they've got the same range on both sides, etc. Moving with awareness. And we look at training, for that particular individual. So the training program for one person is completely different to the training program for the next, but they're all based on the same principles that we need to get from A to B, whatever that A to B happen to be. So it's a progression. So I currently offer the program in one-to-one format, working directly with myself. I've also got a small group format. So Jim there and Claire have joined my running skills group over in Frilford on a Wednesday morning from 10 to 11:30. Could take a couple more people on there if we need to. It's getting fairly full, but if anybody wanted to come along to that and work through the program with me, they can. I've also got a DIY option where you kind of come along, we do an assessment, we put you in the right direction, go away, work on a few things, come back in a month's time, reassess, and progress it. Okay, so there's lots of different ways into the program. And I also have a free park run group that I run on Saturday morning, which a lot of those people actually go on to become clients when they see the results that they're getting. So if anybody wants to contact me about any of that, they can. And there's also, hopefully you've got some links on your sheets about other ways of finding out more about what I do on the Run with Freedom programme. So thank you very much for that. Hope you've gained something from it. And if anybody's got any more questions, fire away. Otherwise, very pleased to meet you all and enjoy your running.
Thank you very much, David. A big round of applause, please. I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. I've got to say the very first day has been excellent, and good. Managed to bring some of that into my training already.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. I hope you found it enjoyable, and I look forward to seeing you again, perhaps on the 11th of November, where we have Dr. Tyler coming to talk about sports nutrition. He's a sports nutritionist, who used to work at Oxford Brookes with his PhD on endurance athletes, and he's coming to talk to us about all those nutritional strategies and all those things that we make up as runners about what we should eat, how many bananas, what kind of breads are really good for us, and try and put us straight about a few facts about sports nutrition. So he's coming on the 11th of November, same time, same place. We also have Mara coming in January on the 13th, who will talk about marathon training. Who better than the second fastest woman in the UK ever to come and have a chat to us about how to do it properly. So yeah, hope to see you all there, and thanks again for supporting tonight. So thank you.